Hello, this is Bentvnewsroundup, a compilation of major stories in the weekend. Thank you for joining us on the program today. Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn has criticized the government over poor funding of the NHS, which has led to more waiting time and patients being treated at the back of ambulances in accident and emergencies wards. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister Theresa May has denied the allegation and stated that more money has been put into the NHS, while 2.8 million more people visited the AIE in 2017, more than they did in 2010.
Does the Prime Minister agree with the Foreign Secretary that the National Health Service needs an extra £5 billion? Prime
Minister. Sit down, Jeremy.
Well, I think the Right Honourable Gentleman, as I recall, was here in this chamber for the autumn budget that was given by my Right Honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, where he announced that we'll be putting £6 billion more into the National Health Service.
Jeremy Corbyn.
The only problem with that, Mr. Speaker, is it was £2.8 billion spread like thin gruel over 2 years.
Yes, that's right.
2 weeks ago, the Prime Minister told the House, and I quote, "It is indeed the case that the NHS was better prepared this winter than ever before." 68 senior A&E doctors have written to the Prime Minister about what they describe as very serious concerns we have for the safety of our patients. They say patients being treated in corridors are dying prematurely. Who should the public believe? The Prime Minister or A&E doctors?
Prime Minister.
It is right that the NHS was better prepared for this winter than it ever has been before. We saw 3,000 more beds being brought into use over the winter period. We saw the use of the 111 call system actually leading to a significant reduction in the number of call-outs, the number of people having to go into hospital. We have seen the changes that have been made in accident and emergency with the GP streamlining, actually helping to ensure that people who do not need to go into hospital went into hospital. Overall, we have seen 2.8 million more people last year visiting accident and emergency than did so in 2010. Our NHS is indeed providing for patients. There are winter pressures. We were prepared for those winter pressures, and we will ensure, as we have done every year under this Conservative government, that the NHS receives more funding.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, since 2010, we've lost 14,000 NHS beds.
Yes,
the King's Fund, the Health Foundation and Nuffield Trust all agree the NHS needs another £4 billion. In December, the month just gone, the NHS England recorded its worst ever A&E performances, with more patients than ever waiting over 4 hours. Now, the UK Statistics Authority say the numbers may be worse because the figures have been fiddled. Can the Prime Minister tell the House when figures calculated in line with previous years will be published?
Prime Minister.
I have to say to the Right Honourable Gentleman that the NHS is open in publishing a whole variety of figures in relation to the targets that it has. We are putting more money into the NHS year in and year out, and we are continuing to do that. But if he wants to talk about figures and about targets being missed, yes, the latest figures show that in England 497 people were waiting more than 12 hours. But the latest figures also show that under the Labour government in Wales, 3,741 people were waiting more than 12 hours.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is responsible for the underfunding of the Welsh Government and the needs of Welsh. And despite that, the overall Welsh Labour health budget has grown by 5% in 2016-17. It's Labour Wales with a problem of underfunding from a Conservative government based in Westminster. So far, Mr. Speaker, this winter, 100,000 patients have been forced to wait more than 30 minutes in the back of an ambulance in NHS England, for which she is responsible. Yet still, the Prime Minister refuses to give the NHS the money it needs. Can she tell us how many more patients will face life-threatening waits in the back of ambulances this winter?
I say to the right honourable gentleman that of course we want to ensure that people aren't waiting in those ambulances. But the only answer he ever comes up with is the question of money. The question... No, that this is... No. The question is this. The question is this. Why are there some hospitals where the percentage of patients waiting more than 30 minutes is 0, and other hospitals where the percentage of patients waiting more than 30 minutes is considerably higher? And if he wants to talk about funding, perhaps we should look at what the Labour Party promised at the last general election last year. It's all very well shadow ministers shouting about the comparison of money. The point is that at the last election, the Institute for Fiscal Studies said this: Labour and the Conservatives are pretty much on the same page. There's not much to choose between them in terms of the money they'll put into the NHS.
Corbyn!
A Labour government wouldn't be underfunding the NHS. A Labour government wouldn't be privatising the NHS. A Labour government wouldn't be underfunding social care. A Labour government would be committed to an NHS free at the point of use as a human right. Mr. Speaker, according to a whistleblower, as many as... Hang on. According to a whistleblower, as many as 80 patients were harmed or died following significant ambulance delays over a 3-week period this winter. This is a very serious situation, and the Prime Minister must be aware of it. What investigation is the Department of Health carrying out into these deeply alarming reports?
Prime Minister.
Right honourable gentleman, that when we hear reports of that sort, of course they are very alarming. And that is why the Department of Health does make sure that investigations do take place. Now, that may be undertaken by the Department of Health or by the particular trust involved, the ambulance trust or the hospital. But these issues are properly investigated because we don't want to see that happening. We do want to see people being properly cared for. And if there are lessons to be learned, then they will be learned. Because what we want to do is our support for the NHS is about providing it with the funding, the doctors, the nurses, the treatments, the capabilities that it needs in order to be able to deliver for patients. That's why we're backing the NHS with more funding. That's why we're ensuring they get the best treatments, and survival rates for cancer are higher than they've ever been before. It's why we're ensuring we have better joined-up services across the NHS and social care, so those people who don't need to go into hospital are able to be cared for at home. And it's why we're ensuring that we're reducing waste in the NHS, so taxpayers' money is spent as effectively as maybe on patient care. That's a plan for the NHS, but it's a plan that puts patients first.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister must be aware of ambulances backed up in hospital car parks, with nurses treating patients in the back of ambulances, ambulance drivers and paramedics desperate to get on to deal with the next patient, can't leave because the patient they're dealing with at that moment can't get into the A&E department. It's been reported that a man froze to death waiting 16 hours for an ambulance. Last week, a gentleman called Chris wrote to me saying, "My friend's 93-year-old father waited 4 hours for an ambulance after a fall." These are not isolated cases. These are common parlance all over the country. It needs money, it needs support, and it needs it now. The Prime Minister is frankly in denial about the state of the NHS. Even the absent Foreign Secretary recognises it, but the Prime Minister isn't listening. People using the NHS can see from their own experience it's being starved of resources. People are dying unnecessarily in the back of ambulances and in hospital corridors.
US President Donald Trump has assured British Prime Minister Theresa May of US continued support for Britain and upholding the special relationship that existed between the two countries.
Well, thank you very much. It's an honor to be with Prime Minister May. We've had a great discussion. We're on the same wavelength in, I think, every respect. The Prime Minister and myself have had a really great relationship, although some people don't necessarily believe that, but I can tell you it's true. I have a tremendous respect for the Prime Minister and the job she's doing, and I think the feeling is mutual from the standpoint of liking each other a lot. And so that was a little bit of a false rumor out there. I just wanted to correct it, frankly, because we have great respect for everything you're doing. And we love your country. We think it's truly great. And we're working on transactions in terms of economic development, trade, maybe most importantly, military. We are very much joined at the hip when it comes to the military. We have the same ideas, the same ideals, and there's nothing that would happen to you that we won't be there to fight for you. You know that. And I just want to thank you very much. This is a great honor to be with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Meanwhile, U.S. President Donald Trump has expressed concerns about Turkish President Erdogan's military action in Syria's Afrin against U.S.-backed Kurdish militias. The White House confirmed that President Trump informed Turkey to limit its military actions and avoid civilian casualties.
Erdogan said Wednesday that Turkish troops and allied Syrian forces have killed at least 268 Kurdish militia members since the offensive started last week. The Turkish leader claims the Kurdish fighters in Syria are linked to the Kurdish terrorist organization PKK and want to join with Turkey's Kurds to form an independent Kurdistan straddling Turkey's border with Syria.
This operation will continue until every last member of the terrorist organization, which has equipped the area over the past few years with 5,000 trucks and 2,000 aircraft full of weapons, is neutralized. We see it as our obligation to cleanse the region of all terrorist organizations.
U.S.-backed Kurdish militias have led a successful campaign against Islamic State in Syria and have taken control of the areas they liberated from the terrorists. Their commanders are adamant to keep them.
We have shown the whole world that we are victorious, and we are going to win today also. The whole Kurdish nation is with us, the town and the people of Afrin.
The United States has provided military support to Kurdish forces to help them fight well-armed and entrenched Islamic State in Syria. Erdogan has always been critical of that support. A U.S. defense spokesman told Al Hura television that U.S. officials have been in close contact with officials in Ankara to address their concerns and refocus on fighting Islamic State.
We need to really focus on what's going on in Afrin to de-escalate that situation, make sure that civilians are not harmed in that operation, really kind of tone down the violence, address Turkey's very legitimate security concerns so that we can get back to fighting ISIS and deal with the very real threat that ISIS poses, particularly in the south and east of Syria.
Major Adrian Galloway said the United States supports several Syrian groups fighting Islamic State.
Any partner forces that decide to stop those activities, to stop fighting ISIS, no longer receive our support. So, for example, if a Kurdish element or other element were to stop working with us to defeat ISIS in the Euphrates River Valley, that force would stop receiving the benefit of U.S. supplies, U.S. advisors, U.S. airstrikes, etc.
The U.S. military official called on Turkey and the Kurds to tone down their rhetoric and allow negotiations to take place so all parties can refocus on fighting Islamic State, which he said could try to return to the area near the Turkish border.
Meanwhile, the European Union has urged Turkey to make the safety of civilians a top priority in its offensive against the Kurdish in Syria.
Turkey's offensive against Kurdish-held Afrin in northwestern Syria intensified Monday, with clashes erupting between Turkish forces and the local U.S.-backed Kurdish militia. Tillerson told reporters in London that the United States has been in touch with both sides.
And are asking that both sides show restraint, please minimize the impact on civilian casualties, of which we've already suffered too many civilian casualties, and see what we can do to work together to address Turkey's legitimate security concerns in a way that's satisfactory to Turkey, and get back to the process of defeating ISIS, securing a peaceful, stable Syria, and working towards a unified Syria through the Geneva peace process that all of us are committed to.
Top European Union diplomat Federica Mogherini asked both sides to guarantee access of humanitarian aid for the civilians. She also expressed concern that the fighting would undermine efforts to find a peaceful solution in Syria's almost 7-year-long civil war.
This, among other things, including military activities from others in Syria, can undermine seriously the resumption of talks in Geneva, which is what we believe could really bring sustainable peace and security for Syria with a political transition.
President Erdogan said his forces will not stop until they secure a safe territory near Turkey's border with Syria. He has accused the United States of arming Kurdish forces, whose ultimate plan, he says, is to stage cross-border attacks on Turkey. Erdogan claims the Syrian Kurds are linked to the separatist Kurdish group PKK, which is listed as a terrorist organization by Turkey, the European Union, and the United States.
Afrin hallolacaktır. Afrin'den geri adım atmak yok. Biz bunu
Afrin will be settled. There won't be a step back from Afrin. We discussed this with our Russian friends. We have an agreement. We also talked to the other coalition partners. We also talked to America, but we could not convince them of one thing. What was that? We told them, why are you combating Islamic State terror group with another terrorist organization?
Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov on Monday accused the United States of fueling Kurdish separatist movement, either due to a lack of understanding of the situation or deliberate provocation. His country's military support has helped the government in Damascus regain much of the territory captured by the Syrian opposition. Turkey has been critical of that support and has even downed one of Russian warplanes over Syria, but the two sides have quickly reconciled.
For the first time, Nigeria will be represented at the February Olympic to compete for a medal in bobsled. US-born Nigerian Seun Adegun, Ngozi Onwumere, and Agoma Omioga will be flying Nigeria's colors.
The Nigerian trio is thrilled to participate in this year's Winter Games.
Nigerians globally, people that are even non-Nigerian, just being supportive of the fact that this country is going to get representation at the Winter Olympics and the continent's going to get representation in the sport of bobsled.
This is a historic appearance for these three women, as no African nation has ever competed in an Olympic bobsledding event.
It's still kind of an out-of-body experience right now. It's kind of surreal,
Another teammate vividly recalls some specific moments.
First-hand experience with bobsled was kind of like, what did I get myself into? I was kind of like, oh my gosh, we have a whole entire year left. Whatever the road led ahead. But you know what? We did have a few aha moments, especially for us as brakemen being so new to the sport.
This teammate says they couldn't be more ready.
We expect to be competitive. We got in this sport thinking that, there were processes to get to where we need to be. Now we're where we need to be, and now it's time to compete, get stronger, get faster, get prepared for the Olympic Games, and, give them a good, run at this.
The dream of one day competing in a Winter Olympic Games started about 4 years ago in a Texas garage. Adegun, who was born in the United States to Nigerian parents, put together a sled out of wood and scraps. She later recruited her teammates as brake women to share her dream. She's a former sprinter who competed for Nigeria at the 2012 London Olympic Games.
Young Rwandans have taken on the challenge to change the narratives that followed the 1994 genocide in Rwanda. This report captures the challenges and difficulties in rewriting the narratives and giving Rwanda a positive image.
Gloria Iribagiza is at it again, banging out another post for her blog.
When you go on Google search, if you're out of the country, you'll see just genocide. But yet there's so much development happening here. The youth are part of a whole generation of vibrant people who are telling stories in different ways. Most of my stories that I write are more about social change and different ways in which that can impact the lives of people.
The 1994 genocide killed an estimated 800,000 people and left scars on Rwanda that last to this day. But Gloria and a group of local writers and filmmakers want to tell a different story. For Gloria, that means focusing on development issues and women and girls achieving their goals. Gloria says she feels free to go out, report, and write stories. But rights groups do continue to express concern about restrictions to free speech and political dissent in Rwanda. Other local content creators VOA spoke to declined to be interviewed on the topic. Gloria is out to meet with some colleagues at a trendy cafe. Maggie Mutesi is a journalist. Victor Kagimba is a spoken word artist. Raymond Kaliyonga is a 3D animator, and he creates content like this.
Right now, we try to get children who are writing stories and getting their stories out there in a moving picture.
The content is produced locally. Independent films that explore complex issues like identity and gender are also gaining attention. Philbert Mbabazi and Samuel Ishimwe Karemangingo both studied filmmaking in Switzerland and returned to Rwanda to pursue their dreams.
The narrative that I want to change is just is to tell our own stories, like to show our own complexities. Because I think like most of the stuff we see, especially in cinema or video, there's no complexity in terms of when you want to when you're showing people. And I think as an African, as a Rwandese, my biggest struggle is to just be able to communicate the world that I'm just another human being. Because there's no Rwandese narrative or African narrative. It's just a personal narrative from every individual.
These are the type of stories to expect from this group. Not what was, but what is and what will be.
With that, so we conclude the news roundup for this week. Thank you for being part of the program. I am Tunde Alabi. Enjoy the rest of your week. Bye. Democracy gives everyone the rights of expression, a passage to a world of freedom, a world that is free, that is fair, equitable, and that is just. But indeed, how just, fair, and equitable is democracy to the people? How economically free are the people in a world of globalization? Join the discussion. Have your say here, live on Ben Television on News Punch. Regardless resident status abroad, living outside the shores of one's homeland can really be challenging and sometimes very difficult. Let's be sincere, to keep pace with happenings from the host country abroad can really be difficult. Here on Dialogue in Diaspora, we give you every information, every news, every current issue you need to know on happenings outside the UK. Dialogue in Diaspora is your link between the world and the United Kingdom. It's your window to Africa development. Here, live on Ben Television.